Hello, everybody. Welcome to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. We've got the crew back together. So very exciting. So today we are going to be talking about, I'm very excited for this one. I'm on the edge of my seat. Exciting and breaking changes in OpenAPI and .NET, right?
But exciting, still exciting. Breaking
Very exciting.
Yes, breaking in parentheses.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm John Galloway. I'm a PM on the .NET community team. I'm joined by Mike, Safia, and Dan. I'm going to start with a single quick community link at the beginning, and then we'll jump over to what you folks have. So this is a post that went out last week, and this is highlighting some .NET 9 networking improvements. This is one of those that has you need the table of contents because there's a lot there. Some of the things that jumped out for me are connection pooling. So this was exciting to see like a non-trivial jump in connection pooling, especially with HTTP 3. So that is pretty cool. You'll see here the jump going from 345,000 requests to 4.3 million. So that's pretty neat. I also noticed in here they have the proxy auto update on Windows. So that's always nice, the proxy automatically updating, and they call out cases like Fiddler. Also neat here is community contributions. So I love that this post has tons of community call outs of all the folks across the community contributing. And gosh, that I had a few more. There's in diagnostics, there's a thing for redaction, which is kind of cool. So you're going to want to log, but there's a common problem with logging is you don't want to log anything you don't want to be retaining, and that includes maybe URLs. And so URI query redaction is a nice thing there. So I encourage you to take some time, go through and read through this. You may want to use Copilot to summarize it. But anyways, great, exciting things there.
Hopefully it motivates you to get that upgrade to .NET 9 done, so you can take advantage of all these new improvements and enhancements to the platform. Just get these things for free by upgrading.
Okay, so that's a great example of this is a new thing in .NET 9 where all you do is change the version number from 8 to 9 and all this stuff happens, right? So you don't have to go change your code at all. You just bump your version number and all of a sudden your networking stuff is much better. So
yeah. And then new features also that you can then opt into, like decide to take advantage of because you're now on the latest version of the platform. If you haven't done your upgrades yet, I think we were originally going to do a session on upgrades for today, but we decided, oh wait, we've got some cool stuff coming in .NET 10 that we really want to talk about. But if you haven't done your upgrades yet, the .NET Upgrade Assistant is a tool that actually can help with .NET version to version upgrades. Like you can just install it as like a VS extension, and then on a project, you just right click and say, please upgrade, and upgrade to the latest .NET version. And it will take care of switching the target framework moniker and taking all the NuGet packages and upgrading them to the correct versions for the latest supported release. Makes it pretty easy to do. So take a look at that if you haven't had a chance to try that out.
Cool. All right. Well, let us switch over to talking about these. Now, this says upcoming. It doesn't say exciting and breaking. So I hope that's
sorry. Yeah, but they are exciting and breaking, and we'll get into it.
Mike decided to not go with the clickbait title on the slides and more classic Microsoft, I guess.
Right. So hi, folks. You're probably sick of seeing this by now because we were here last week, and then a couple weeks before that. But we're back again to talk about something that we think is really important to make you aware of, and that is some of the changes that we're making in OpenAPI, the OpenAPI support that we just released, last release in .NET 9, but we're upgrading it to support, let me get to my slide, support OpenAPI 3.1, which is the newest version of OpenAPI. It's actually been the latest version for several years now, but many people are still back on 3. The dependency that we were using was not upgraded to 3.1 yet, so we had to just go with 3 for .NET 9, but now we're moving up, and we'll tell you all about that. There are some other things that we've put into Preview 1, which is coming out next week, at least as planned. So these are all things that you'll be able to check out in that Preview 1 release. Support for YAML-based OpenAPI documents, fixes for handling range attributes that we discovered, there was a small problem with in .NET 9, and also handling of recursive and self-referential schemas, which is just a perennial problem in OpenAPI, honestly, and we also got bit by it. But we think we've got that fixed now, and you can check it out in Preview 1. Some of these have also been backported into the patch release of 9, so you'll be able to see them there as well.
Yeah, I think the handling of recursive and self-referential schemas was a big one. Lots of folks were impacted by that. So that one is backported into .NET 9. And when we talk about this OpenAPI 3.1 stuff, we'll talk a little bit inside baseball about why that bug happened and why it doesn't happen in 3.1 versions of the OpenAPI stuff.
Yep.
Mike, you're the OpenAPI expert. You're going to tell us all about 3.1.
Well, I'm going to tell you at least, kind of the ugly bits about 3.1, which is 3.1, even though it's a minor version number, is actually not a minor version. It's not, OpenAPI doesn't follow semantic versioning the way that you might expect. OpenAPI 3.1 is a major release. It's not compatible with 3.0. And in particular, it introduces support for full JSON schema 2022-12. Which is still a draft, but there are no actual released versions of JSON schema, the JSON schema spec. And this is a very significant upgrade from 3.0, which was based on JSON schema, I think, draft 5, which came out in 2017 or some ancient time like that. In the older version of OpenAPI, it was talked about that it supports what they called an extended subset of JSON schema, which seemed like a good idea at the time, but in fact, what it meant is that you couldn't use standard JSON schema tooling on things that used OpenAPI 3.0. So that was one of the main things that they took on to fix in 3.1. It wasn't something that they could do without some amount of breaking. So that's what's the story with 3.1. Some of the things that are going to be most significant for .NET developers is that null is now a valid type in OpenAPI. Even though it was always a valid type in JSON schema, OpenAPI in 3.0 and prior didn't allow it. But now you can specify it, and in particular, that's useful when you want to specify a type as an array, which is also a new thing that's brought in by this new version of JSON schema. So before, you used to be able to say, my field is a number or my field is a string. Now you can say, my field is a string or a number. And you have this array of types that you put in there. And one of those types can be null. And so this is how nullable types are now described in OpenAPI by using this array where you say string and null, and that's a way of saying this is a nullable string. And so you're going to see that in what we're releasing here in Preview 1. There's a couple of other things. Just one other thing that I'll call out is that in OpenAPI 3.0, there was sort of some special significance that was applied to read-only, where sometimes it was applied on requests, but not on responses and things like that. That has all gone away because now we're just relying on the base read-only keyword in JSON schema. So that might have some significance for people as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Safia so that she can tell you about the OpenAPI Universe.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about OpenAPI 3.1. support for that coming. I wanted to talk a little bit about what exactly is under the scenes when you are generating OpenAPI documents in ASP.NET Core. And here specifically, we're talking about the Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI package, and this will hopefully get you a sense of like, you request an OpenAPI document, what all is actually happening behind the scenes. And there's really 3 different components that are coming into play. The first is system text JSON. System text JSON, we know and love it as kind of like a JSON serializer, deserializer. In .NET 9, to support the OpenAPI scenario, they also added the ability to emit JSON schemas from .NET types. So the idea is I could hand you any .NET type, and system text JSON would tell you, here's the JSON schema that, important fact, complies with the JSON schema specification, not the extended subset of JSON schema that OpenAPI was using. Oh, now we see some of where the interesting things might be. So system text JSON is giving us a JSON schema that complies with the JSON schema standard, not the OpenAPI 3.0 and it represents it using a plain old JSON node. So in system text JSON, there is no strongly typed JSON schema type. That was kind of an intentional design decision that was made. We didn't adopt a full-fledged JSON schema type in the system text JSON API in .NET 9 or .NET 10. Instead, that strongly typed schema definition is provided by the Microsoft OpenAPI library. And this is really the engine that is powering the OpenAPI document representation in memory for not just Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI, but a bunch of other packages. If you've used Swashbuckle, that uses Microsoft OpenAPI under the scenes. If you've used Kyoto or interacted with its client generator, that also uses Microsoft OpenAPI. There are other packages in the ecosystem. I believe aspects of Azure Functions OpenAPI integration also use Microsoft OpenAPI. So that is a big bubble in the universe that is responsible for providing an in-memory representation of an OpenAPI document and APIs to serialize and deserialize it. And this is like the thing that's getting the big breaking change in .NET 10 / V2. And that's kind of what we want to share a little bit of information about. These 2 packages, System Text JSON and Microsoft OpenAPI, come together like Voltron in the Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI package. And this package really is gluing together lots of different concepts that exist in the ecosystem. It understands the JSON node that is produced by System Text JSON. It has an understanding of all of the endpoints that exist in your ASP.NET Core application so that it can discover them and resolve them into a document. And it understands a little bit about how to map that JSON node, that like opaque type that we get from System Text JSON, into something that Microsoft OpenAPI can represent in its schemas. So these are all of the different components in the ecosystem. The circles that are highlighted in green are the ones that are going to be going through breaking changes as part of this. So the breaking changes are going to come to Microsoft OpenAPI because we take a dependency on it in our Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI package. There'll be some breaking changes that you will feel there too. Cool. Was that a good lay of the land? Do we feel like informed about all of the Lego pieces? I should have done these as Legos instead of planets, but what can you do? Okay, on the next slide, I've got some bullets that talk a little bit about what is happening in Microsoft OpenAPI v2. So it's a new major version of the Microsoft OpenAPI package. Prior versions were versioned 1.6, yada, yada. This new major version contains breaking changes. Some of these breaking changes exist to support OpenAPI 3.1. Mike talked a little bit earlier about how nullable is not really a thing in JSON schema. Instead, if you want to model something as a null type, you have to use that kind of the type with the string or null or integer or null or what have you. So there are API changes in the package that reflect those underlying schema changes. There are also introductions to things in addition to removals. So there is a JSON schema type enum that you can use to represent all of the different types in your schema. So that's one set of breaking changes. And then, you ship a major version. It's helpful to kind of just improve some things. You have an excuse to make some enhancements. So there are also enhancements that aren't directly related to the schema. We're going to go through some of these in some of the demos we'll show. There are improvements to the APIs that exist for reading OpenAPI documents. If you have worked with examples or default values, there are changes to the way that those are modeled in the document. And there are better APIs for interacting with referenceable types, which relates to that bug around recursive and self-referential schemas that everyone was running into. So we'll talk a little about that. So those are like kind of the categories of breaking changes. The package is currently in preview. On the slide, it says that the latest preview is preview 7. When .NET 10 preview 1 ships next week, the version that it is targeting there is 2.0 preview 5 of the package. So Microsoft.OpenApi is not part of the ASP.NET Shared Framework or the .NET Runtime or anything like that. It's its own independent package, which means that it has its own release cadence. We are trying to kind of eagerly adopt previews as they get released so that we can kind of find bugs and iterate on things quickly. It will GA before .NET 10 GA, so the plan is that by the time we get ready to release .NET 10, there will be a GA version of the OpenAPI package that you will be able to consume. But our focus and the reason we really wanted to talk about this is it's kind of a big change. So we want people to try things out early, give us feedback. Mike and I have been playing around with it. We've been finding bugs that we're reporting to people. The sooner that we kind of try things out and report these bugs, the better we can be about making the package much more resilient and have fewer bugs as part of the 2.0. And then that has a positive impact on the entire OpenAPI ecosystem in .NET, because as I mentioned, this is kind of the big underlying package that a lot of OpenAPI related things in .NET use. I think the last bullet, Mike, I added right after a conversation that we had this morning, which is we were kind of talking about how the big thing behind this change is that Microsoft OpenAPI has been updated to support 3.1 schemas. And so as a result, the default mental model for the in-memory types that you're going to interact with, they're all OpenAPI 3.1 based. So even if you're not interested in 3.1 or don't care about it or what have you, you still have to know about it because the way the document is represented in memory, if you're writing customizations or anything like that, is 3.1. Cool. Okay, I added this slide. This is just FAQs. Will OpenAPI 3.1 be supported in .NET 8 and .NET 9? No. Sorry, that was that was terse, but I'll explain why here. So we introduced the Microsoft ASP.NET Core package in .NET 8, and then we had the full-fledged OpenAPI support in .NET 9. As I mentioned, supporting 3.1 requires that you take this breaking change version of the Microsoft OpenAPI package. And it is hard/impossible for us to introduce breaking changes in a servicing release of version of .NET that we've already shipped, like .NET 8 or .NET 9. So what that means is that you will not be able to get OpenAPI 3.1 support out of the box if you're targeting those two runtimes and you're using the 8.0 or 9.0 versions of the package. .NET 10 is great though. upgrading is fun. If you're on .NET 8 or .NET 9, upgrading should be hopefully pretty straightforward. So if OpenAPI 3.1 support is really important for you, that's an option you can take when you do the upgrade. Next question with a short response. What's the new default OpenAPI version? This is a breaking behavioral change. So in .NET 9, if you generated an OpenAPI document, that OpenAPI document was default serialized to version 3.0.1, I believe. That is no longer the case. By default, all documents will get serialized to OpenAPI 3.1. The differences are there, but subtle. If we go to the next bullet, you can explicitly target OpenAPI 3.0. You always had the option of being able to set the OpenAPI version that you want. So if you want to downgrade, or sorry, I shouldn't say downgrade because that seems like derogatory. If you wanted to downcast or use a different OpenAPI version, you can stick to 3.0 by explicitly setting it, and we'll show you how to do that in the demos. Will there be an upgrade guide? Yes, eventually. This talk/session is also, I think, a little bit of a teaser for the type of content that we will introduce in a upgrade guide. So you all's feedback and reaction to like the demos and what we talk about will kind of help us figure out what's important to write about in the upgrade guide and what is not. I think our next slide is demos, but John, I think we could jump to questions if we want. You're muted.
While I'm going to questions, can you check your microphone? Because I think you may have the wrong microphone selected. So let's look at a few questions. Okay. So one from Sander was saying, from the previous slides, you're missing produces response types description parameter in .NET 10 Preview 1. I'm guessing this may have had to do with a pull request or something.
This might have been a community contribution, I believe.
Yes.
Thank
cool.
you. Was that the contributor? I actually don't know.
Yeah, that was Sander. Hi, Sander.
Sander, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome pull request. Really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll be sure to highlight all the PR community contributions when .NET 10 Preview 1 goes out, so everyone can see all the awesome things that the community has been doing in the release.
Cool. Okay, here's one. Is gRPC JSON transcoding documentation with Swagger OpenAPI also part of this universe? I thought I saw a nod yes from Safia.
Yes, it is sort of part of the what was that? So gRPC JSON transcoding is part of the universe. The OpenAPI support that currently exists for gRPC JSON transcoding takes a dependency on Swashbuckle. So it's implemented using some of Swashbuckle's schema filter and schema generation APIs. In .NET 9, we made an effort to replat that gRPC JSON transcoding OpenAPI implementation onto the system text JSON based schema generation that I talked about. And we ran into some challenges. And the challenges are related to limitations that currently exist in system text JSON. When you have types that implement any type of custom JSON converter. Oh, I love these because we get to get into the weeds with things. So if you have a type that implements a custom JSON converter, the current experience is that system text JSON will not emit a JSON schema for that type because we don't know what your converter is doing. You could be mapping any type of structure to that .NET type. So there's no way for you to outline what the schema should be. And this limitation caused an issue for the gRPC JSON transcoding because a big aspect of it was being able to map types that were represented by protobuf definitions into JSON schemas, and we just didn't have the hooks to be able to declare the type of schema a type could have if it wasn't directly serialized by JSON schema without any custom converters at play. So there is an issue on the runtime repo that tracks this, and maybe while we're chatting or showing things, I can find it and share it here. This kind of I guess, gap in the JSON schema support is, I think it's a really helpful one to solve. I don't know, maybe people in the audience can chime in how many people are taking advantage of custom JSON converters, but it is helpful to essentially have an API where a type can describe its JSON schema. And then when we're constructing OpenAPI documents or anything else, we can say, hey, we can't figure out what your JSON schema is because you're a protobuf definition that's being used in a gRPC JSON-based API. Can you tell us what your schema is? And that functionality just doesn't exist right now. If you're super interested in gRPC JSON transcoding and kind of improvements or having it be supported in the new package, chime in the chat. I'm kind of curious to see how many people are taking advantage of that feature.
All right.
Cool. One quick thing, John. I for Sander had put a comment about official team changes. If you could bring that one up real quick, I just wanted to speak to that one.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just wanted to clarify on this that when you get a PR into the repo and you contribute a change or a new piece of functionality, it's as official as anything else that goes into the repo. So we include when we do our release notes and we're talking about all the new functionality enhancements. That includes stuff from contributors from Microsoft as much as it includes contributions from the community. So your change was just as official as anyone else's, and that's really important to realize because when you send PRs to us, we also then the quality bar for those PRs also has to be the same. So hence all the we did a stand up a few weeks ago where Safia walked through how do you submit a PR to the aspnetcore repo and what the expectations are there, and having tests and going through the API reviews and the team reviews on those PRs. That's why we do all that, is because if it goes in, it's 100% official. So Sander, thank you for submitting an official new feature to the .NET 10 release.
Cool.
I had a couple other FAQ questions that I wonder if we also wanted to address. Safia, when you said that 10 will support OpenAPI 3.0, that's at the spec level, right? You can generate an OpenAPI 3.0 document. So if you have clients that require a 3.0 document, they don't know how to process a 3.1 document potentially, I guess, then you can, use that earlier version of the spec, but that won't change the .NET APIs that you're using to generate that spec. If you were trying to interact in your C# code with the OpenAPI spec, the OpenAPI data model, the document, that will all be done with the new OpenAPI.NET based APIs, which are now 3.1 based. So there would potentially be some breaking changes in that space, correct? Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
For the client world, is there anything to share on how much the code generators and testing tools have moved to actually adopt 3.1? If you try to use, I don't know, I think we have NSWAG tooling for generating code clients based off of OpenAPI specs. Do they support those versions, or is the community updating?
I've been trying to find time to really get a handle on that, Dan, and I haven't had a chance yet. But I think some of these tools have updated, but some of them have not. So, but I don't have a real accounting to share.
Yeah, I know off the top of my head, I mentioned Kyoto as a consumer of the Microsoft OpenAPI package. That one, I'm sure will upgrade to support it because they're kind of going through a similar change as we are. And then I think beyond the .NET ecosystem, there's also things like Spectral. Spectral, I think, supports 3.1.
It does. Yep.
So there are also not .NET based OpenAPI tools that likely support 3.1 because that spec. How long has 3.1 been out? Like 5 years? 3?
3 or 4, I think. 3 or 4
years. Wow.
Years.
It's not like a news.
No, it's not new.
It's not new.
It's not new.
This is another reason this is kind of like a momentous occasion as we've
Right.
caught up a bit with
Cool.
that's happening.
Cool. I've got a few more quick questions. Maybe we can go to the style of the Safia quick answers to questions.
Yeah, sorry, I can be a little verbose sometimes.
We got to get to demos too. We got some code we want to show.
Okay, given that manually maintained YAML specs provide clarity and ease of review of pull requests, what are the concrete benefits of using Microsoft.OpenApi for evolving spec definitions?
Is this a spec first versus code first question?
I think it is.
Like,
should you hand author your OpenAPI spec, or should you write
artisanally crafted?
So I want to say that yes, if you want to hand author your OpenAPI, you can do that. There are people that do that. But one of the things that we introduced in 9 that we're going to be improving in 10 is the ability to generate your spec at build time. And if you generate your spec at build time, you can then actually check it in to your repo. And then you can do that review in the pull requests like you're talking about here. So it's kind of a code first approach, but with an emphasis on spec as a first class artifact, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think you can get the best of both worlds by doing this.
Cool. Okay, here. Can we use OpenAPI 3.1 with a local model?
I'm not sure what local model means.
I'm not sure what that means.
Thinking AI local model, which maybe is the wrong interpretation. But Jose, if you want to comment, maybe clarifying your question, we're happy to try and answer it.
Okay. All right. Ahmed is saying .NET 10 by default should target single build. I work with C# and Go builds are extremely light. And then there was something more later on, small builds are important for density and startup and stuff. I'm not sure exactly what this was calling about with single build, but I'm curious there too about like AOT and, if they're taking advantage of that.
Yeah, that's actually a good question. We talked about this in .NET 9, but maybe it helps to kind of like highlight it, which is that the OpenAPI support and the Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI package is native AOT friendly by default. So you can include it in applications that you're publishing with AOT, and it'll continue to be AOT friendly moving forward into .NET 10 and beyond. So I guess that's the connection. I think our AOT support is pretty good. And I know like one of the big priorities when we did OpenAPI support in 9.0 is like, let's make it AOT compatible by default and let's maintain that throughout the process.
Cool. Okay.
I don't know if it's also talking about single file publish. Like it might be like single build maybe refers to single file. I mean, you can certainly do single file publishing if you want to. Whether we would change that to be the default, I think is there's a whole breaking change discussion there as well. Like with that, how many build systems would that break as a result of doing that?
Cool. Okay, we have some more questions flagged, but I think we do want to allow time to get to.
We got to see code. Yeah.
Yes, I should. Oh no.
Is this where you need to read
demo guide swoop in?
Okay. I just switched browsers to Edge. Yes, I was using Edge before. Nobody.
An excellent choice.
Yes.
Yes, an excellent browser. Why an excellent choice? Because Safari, which was my previous browser, would just barf when I was opening GitHub PRs that had like a big diff. And I sometimes write PRs that have big diffs. And so Safari was no longer a valid option, so I switched to Edge. But this is my first time screen sharing from StreamYard on Edge, so I'm getting prompted with like the Mac OS, you have to give us permissions. This is
all right.
When you don't do.
So Safia, I might be able to bring up the code if you want to. I'm not sure I'll be able to demo it in the way that you would, but I can at least bring it up. Would you like me to try?
Yeah, I was hoping to actually like run things and and show stuff. But we can try it. Let's do that.
It's really quick to rejoin if you need to do that.
Okay.
You just have to
do it.
I mean, you're a smart engineer. I'm sure you'll grant that permission.
Oh my gosh. Now I'm in trouble. If I don't come back in like two seconds. We're done. All right. I'll be right back.
Okay.
We could try and take. There are some other questions / comments and stuff.
Yeah. I know someone was asking about like when .NET 10 Preview 1 is releasing, and
yes,
the plan is next week. It's coming next week. That's the plan. I mean, subject to change, of course, assuming everything goes smoothly. But with by next Tuesday, hopefully, we should have a .NET 10 Preview 1 build to play around with. Yeah. That's the plan.
Cool. I was going to ask Dan, I forget, have we published like a rough schedule on that? Or is that just kind of like everyone knows because it's that way every year, basically?
I don't think we've like published anything officially. That maybe we have, but the tradition, if you know our history, we ship every November, every year. There's a .NET release, so .NET 10 is expected to ship in November of this year, and we ship previews monthly. So there'll be the February preview, which is preview 1. That's the first one. Is expected to drop next week, and then every month from here until November there should be a .NET 10 preview update. Usually we do 2 release candidates just prior to the final general availability stable release in November. So September, October usually are the release candidate releases, and then everything before that is a preview release. So that gives you an idea of the rough schedule, subject to change, of course, but that's been the history so far. Welcome back, Safia.
That was blazing.
I was very nervous. I was like, if I don't come back in like 2 seconds, I'm gonna get my smart engineer cred. Okay. Now we're ready to demo. I have given. I'm actually gonna demo my entire screen. Move you guys over to this corner here. Okay. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties. Cool. So what Mike and I were going to demo, this is the TrainingApi, which we showed at .NET Conf this past year. It's kind of what we've been using as our simple OpenAPI example. Here I've got Scalar UI as the kind of UI for visualizing the OpenAPI document. One of the things you will notice, small but subtle, OpenAPI spec 3.1.1. Wow, so magical, amazing. This is kind of it. No, it's not entirely it. So this is reflecting the fact that the backing OpenAPI document, which I've popped in JSON here, is now being serialized to 3.1.1 by default. This is alluding to that behavior breaking change that I was telling you about earlier, which is that by default, we've kind of upgraded the API version that we serialize when you are using the package. If we jump into the code, let me increase editor font size here, you'll see that not much has changed in the actual program CS where I'm configuring stuff. I'm still doing map OpenAPI. That is going to provide me with that endpoint. Here's me registering my Scalar API. I've got add OpenAPI. So not too many breaking changes with respect to how you interact with the aspnetcore OpenAPI extension methods itself. Most of the changes are underlying in the OpenAPI related things. Really
so if you're just wiring it up and saying generate me an OpenAPI doc from whatever is there by default, no customization, that should just work. Is that right?
Yep. So if you are Mike and I were talking about categories of users, and one category of user is you're just somebody that's generating OpenAPI documents. You're not customizing them too much. You aren't doing anything with transformers, any kind of enhancements like that. Breaking changes are not going to impact you too much. If you really want to stick to 3.0, here's how you can set the OpenAPI version explicitly. This is using an option that we had prior to .NET 10. So that option is still available to you. So cool, you upgrade, you get 3.1 support. If you're not using transformers, if you're not interacting with the OpenAPI document, everything pretty much stays the same and you can go on your merry way. But for the most part, you might be using OpenAPI transformers to enhance your document, maybe add additional descriptions, maybe add examples to types, things like that. And this is where the changes start to come into play. So we have two transformers defined for our API. One of them is use examples, and one of them is use job bearer authentication. We talked about these during the .NET Conf presentation. Here is an example of one of the breaking changes that is coming because of the underlying OpenAPI model changing. So before, if you had to set an example on an OpenAPI schema or set a default value, there was this concept called OpenAPI Any, and it allowed you to maintain a set of, or represent certain primitives or complex types in the OpenAPI document. That is no longer a thing in OpenAPI v2. Instead, these examples are represented directly as JSON nodes. Hopefully that's easy for you to see. And so you can use the JSON node or the JSON values that come from the system text JSON library to represent your examples. And so the delta that I made here is like before this used to be OpenAPI object. Note this type no longer exists. Instead, whenever I'm initializing something, I would have to use JSON object or JSON value or any of the underlying types from the system text JSON API. I think this is the change that is like most likely to impact people because people use JSON value or use OpenAPI in examples quite often for default values, especially because sometimes for examples you want to maybe control it more granularly. I think this is a good change because OpenAPI Any was kind of challenging to deal with sometimes. You had to kind of figure out the right subclass if you were wanting a string or an integer or a date time. And with this, I think it's just one less thing to worry about. If everything is a JSON object or a JSON value, and you can build on top of those. So that is one of the big user-facing deltas that people will see. The other, are there any questions before I jump in?
Nothing specific on your demo yet.
Yep, cool. Okay. So OpenAPI Any is gone. JSON object and JSON node and JSON value become the ways that you represent examples and default values in your OpenAPI document. If you are referencing the previous OpenAPI Any base types and you do the upgrade, you will get tons of warnings about the fact that these types are not defined, and you will have to go make the migration from those to the JSON node based ones. Other big breaking change is the type used to define the JSON schema itself. So previously, if you were using Microsoft OpenAPI 1.6 or you were living in the .NET 9 world, the type was represented as a string. And there was, I don't know actually if they did do any checks on what the string could be. I think theoretically you could like write a naughty transformer that would put some like insane string value for the type, and it might have serialized it fine. Not that you should do that. So previously, the way you defined the type in a schema was as a plain old string. In .NET 10, and with the v2 version of the package, there is now a JSON schema type enum. We think we can go to def here. The JSON schema type enum is, well, it's defined as a flags enum, so that's how you can kind of do the union of different type representations that Mike was talking about earlier, where you can say something is a string or a number or null or what have you. And you can see it defines all of the types that are permitted by the JSON schema specification, which are null, boolean, integer, number, string, object, and array. I think those are like 5 or 6 that need to be encoded there. And like null is the one to call out there because, as Mike was talking about earlier, before, nullable was this entirely separate property that you would set to true or false to indicate that a type could be null. In this new universe, you do that by declaring a JSON schema type of like string or null. So if we jump back to the transformer that I had here, you'll see that I've implemented kind of a map type method that will take a type parameter, and any type that it encounters in my document associated with that, it will update its schema.type to be that JSON schema type. And so the way I would use this API is with the new JSON schema type, not a string anymore. I could say map type string, and let's do something like kind of sadistic here and say that all of the strings, the dotnet strings in my library, can be represented in JSON schema as strings, or I'm being sadistic, so I'll just say arrays. And this is how you would represent something as the union of two types. This was previously like not something you could do in the OpenAPI library at all, but it's an option that exists now. Or if you wanted to say something is a nullable string, it becomes JSON schema type string or JSON schema type null. Kind of a subtle change. But as the person who had to go and do the upgrade from v1.6 to v2 for the package, I had to do a lot of find and replace of all of the string types to be this new enum, and all of the places where we use nullable to do all of this fun stuff. Again, the benefit of using a package like Microsoft ASP.NET OpenAPI is a lot of those mechanics are hidden from you. And again, you're only impacted by things like this if you're the kind of person who is using transformers to customize your experience directly. So those are some of the deltas that might hit you right away if you are particularly engaging with the transformer layer. And these are the ones that you would encounter if you were using Preview 1. Mike, was there anything you wanted to add? Because I was going to do a segue into what is coming in Preview 2, actually.
Did you want to talk about how the schema store is going away?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. That's I think another big thing people need to know.
Yes, totally. Cool. Were there any questions before we jumped into like part 2 of the demo about these changes?
Let me see. Still, I didn't see anything. Well, there was one here, which is just, so I think you were showing enumerables, right? They're asking why the types are 1, 2, 1, 2, 4, etc. Oh, yeah. So binary mask then, right?
Yes, this is the
bitmask.
binary bitmask trick for enums. It should be clear that this is like the underlying representation. When they get serialized into the document, they get serialized according to the JSON schema spec, like Mike was showing us earlier. But yeah.
Cool. That was the only question related to demo so far.
Oh, either people are really jiving with it, or there's going to be some fun stuff later. Okay, I should clearly have fewer windows open. But I have made a jump. You are now in the ASP.NET Core code base. This is one of the sample apps that we have for showing all of the different OpenAPI features. And I wanted to pop open the sample app to talk a little bit about some of the changes that are coming in .NET 10 Preview 2. As I was kind of stressing earlier, Microsoft OpenAPI ships on its own cadence. And as previews are shipping out, we'll consume them as like eagerly as possible to kind of be able to react to things. This is my long-winded way of saying, if you upgrade from 9.0 to try .NET 10 Preview 1, you will see breaking changes. If you go from Preview 1 to Preview 2 in a couple months, you'll also see breaking changes. I'm sorry, these are like, we're in the growing pains period of this, but it'll eventually like stabilize for things. So one of the breaking changes, again, this is not going to impact you if you pick up Preview 1 next week, but it will impact you if you pick up Preview 2 in a month or 2 months or whenever things happen, is the introduction of interface types for a lot of the components in the OpenAPI data model. So here's an example of one. We have a transformer that does, I think, something that people do pretty often, which is register some sort of security scheme in their OpenAPI document. And one of the things you'll notice is there's a subtle change here, which is that my security requirements in my document are no longer defined as a dictionary of like string keys and OpenAPI security schemes. There's now this interface type. And behind the scenes, the interface types are powering functionality in the OpenAPI package to be able to represent a component in the document as directly inlined or referenced. And this ties in to the way that we represent OpenAPI schemas. So interfaces, base type for everything, and then there are concrete implementations of these interfaces that represent a reference to that thing or that thing itself. I hope I'm not losing people, but I'm going to jump in.
I have a quick question here to make sure I'm following. There's in the example you showed, there's nothing specific to security or authorization there. You're showing basically the interface and implementation kind of idea.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. This is just the interface and implementation, kind of showcasing how these data models are going to change in the way that you interact with stuff moving forward. So, like, there's now an interface for an OpenAPI security scheme, and there's a concrete implementation of it. That's OpenAPI security scheme. Similarly, there is an OpenAPI schema type, and there are two implementations of it, one for an OpenAPI schema reference and one for an OpenAPI schema. Now we're really in the weeds. This is where it gets fun. This is where we get to talk a little bit and maybe present a solution to a piece of feedback that we were getting from .NET 9, which is people want to be able to dynamically generate schemas in their OpenAPI documents and insert them into operations. So, maybe you have some sort of like ambient type that we can't really grok when you are generating your OpenAPI schema. Maybe it has like a custom converter or something like that. It was previously really challenging to do this in .NET 9 because we had the concept of an OpenAPI schema store where these schemas would be stored and it was internal and you couldn't access it. And it was like, Safia, why can't you make it public? And I was like, wait, because I think this is coming, which is in .NET 10, the OpenAPI document itself provides the mechanisms that you need for being able to modify the store or all of the schema components that are in your API, and then be able to add references to them. So here's an example. I have a transformer where I want to define an additional parameter on all of my endpoints that is going to come from the header. And this parameter has a custom header type, which under the scenes is actually just a string, but that's a minor detail. I can say that I have an OpenAPI schema reference to this header type, and I can provide that as the schema type associated with my parameter. And then at the document level, I can say, hey, document, I want you to register a new component, something new in your store that is a schema, and the schema is identified by this unique identifier header type. And so now, magically, you have kind of got the mechanics in place to be able to generate schemas and store them at the top level document as raw OpenAPI schemas, and then have references to them from all of your different parameters, response types, or request bodies. And so if you are kind of doing these more sophisticated customizations where you are trying to create new parameter types or create new schemas, you can do that in .NET 10. And what's really great is we didn't really have to add any additional new APIs to support it at the Microsoft ASP.NET Core OpenAPI layer. We're taking advantage of the data model directly. So that is pretty neat. So these kind of interfaces and the notion of reference types and direct types are going to be one type of breaking change that you'll encounter moving forward as we do these upgrades. I think that was it. As I mentioned, there is this is a preview package. Lots of things are changing. So there's like small bugs that we'll find with like the way some examples are serialized or things like that. But try it out, share your feedback. If you see breaking changes where you're like, hey, you broke something and it's like completely impossible to do the scenario that we could do before, let us know and we can work on getting it addressed. But yeah, that was my rant.
Okay. Should I switch the slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
We just have one last slide,
All right.
which is the coming attractions. And what we've talked about here mostly is stuff that's in preview 1 of .NET 10. But we've got a number of other features for OpenAPI that we have scheduled. Hopefully will come in future previews of .NET 10. One of them is support for metadata in XML doc comments. We got a question about that in the chat, and yep, that is planned. Safia's already got a lot of it coded. So
yes, I am in the process of, I had a PR in ASP Labs, and I'm in the process of polishing that up and getting it to be in aspnetcore and ready for review. I'm hoping to have that. It's on my to-do list for today. So we'll see if all the coffee I drank this morning helps me out. But yes.
Now that's been on your list for a while, and I'm sure you're going to be very glad to cross that one off, right?
It has, and I've tried lots of different strategies for it, and it's, believe it or not, parsing XML doc comments is, parsing XML is a thing. Parsing XML doc comments is like a whole other thing.
a couple of other things we're planning is Safia showed the transformer that adds the security scheme into the OpenAPI document. We hope to be able to do that for you automatically by just inspecting the authentication providers that you have in your application and figuring out there what should go in the OpenAPI document.
Nice.
And then the last thing is we have a number of improvements that we hope to do for build time OpenAPI document generation, and I think that's important to talk, to support that workflow that we talked about earlier, where you actually generate at build time, check that into your source control, and then you're able to manage that as a first-class artifact of your application.
Yes, I'm excited about this one. I had a bit of an epiphany on it yesterday. And so I'm excited to like play with the design there a little bit more.
Cool.
But
Cool.
it'll be fun. Yep. Yeah. So these are kind of like the palette cleansers we provide as you're dealing with breaking changes. If you ever get frustrated or annoyed, there's all these goodies that you can enjoy. So.
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, I've got a high level question before going to the other questions, which is, and I try my best to follow along. I'm gonna have to rewatch because there's a lot that's breaking.
There was a lot,
in my brain. What sort of things, like as far as breaking changes, am I going to see silent failures that I need to find in testing, or are things going to come up by like build breaks, or like, you know what I mean? Like how much is going to be in my face and I'm going to know that it's a problem and I'll fix it, versus something where it's like somebody reports an error and it's like, hey, your API is broken?
Most of them are going to be the latter. You're going to get breaking changes in your build about types that are not defined. Okay. Oh yeah, sorry, not test changes. So it'll be in your face. Most of them are stuff like, hey, this thing where you were passing a string, it's got to be a JSON schema type now, or this thing it expects an interface, so you have to initialize the concrete type. They'll be kind of explicit in your face.
I think the tricky part will just be when you see those build errors, figuring out, okay, well, what's the translation between OpenAPI 3.1 and OpenAPI 3.0 that I was doing before?
Okay. And are there potentially any like analyzers or some things that, that can help me with that?
Good question. There aren't. I had this thought that it would kind of be nice to do analyzers that, for example, do the mapping from a string to a JSON schema type. that is not something that is out there at the moment. Maybe worth exploring before GA. It's also definitely something that would be good to author in like a community package.
Mm-hmm.
So John, I hate to interrupt. I know that we have also a bunch of questions on the community stand-up, but I believe Mike, Safia, and I, all three of us, have a .NET 10 planning review actually internally that we're all supposed to be at in like 60 seconds.
Oh my goodness!
We might have to cut this this
Yeah,
short.
yeah.
But
Okay.
what we can do though is if people have additional questions about what they just saw in the OpenAPI support, please come to the GitHub repo, post issues. If you have suggestions on how we can make it better or things you'd like to see changed, you can also start a discussion in the GitHub discussions section of the repo, and we can continue the conversation there.
We'd love to continue the conversation there.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks everyone for watching. Enjoy your planning meeting.
Thanks everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.